So someone requested that I do a demo on VP and especially how they play differently with Electronic rather than Mir, because they've talked about making some changes. I think Electronic has been floated as potentially doing some IGLing, that their system and Blade system are very different, all this type of stuff. And I think people want to see kind of what the differences are. And I'm really happy to show you that, except unlike most people who seriously just really love watching VP, I haven't really enjoyed watching VP, so pretty much I don't really know how they used to play. So I watched a demo, I looked at how Mir played, which was very passive, didn't really get a lot of resources, and their team kind of just played a little differently than how I traditionally see Anubis played. So I can kind of compare that a little bit. I mean, it is only one demo. They were playing against G2. Maybe they were, you know, playing something specific. Maybe there was a reason for what they were doing. But I can try and compare that a little bit to how Electronic is playing in this game. And it's not going to be perfect, but, you know, none of my reviews are perfect, let's be completely honest. Oh yeah, but before we go any further, I have some very important data to show you guys, okay? And I didn't make this, I'm not that obsessive. I'm actually not that obsessed with this Zontix thing, okay? But someone gave me this, he posted it in my Discord, and this is what it is, okay? Aim accuracy when spotted, and headshot accuracy. And when you look at that, Zontix is way down here at the bottom right because he aims for the body, not the head, okay? Crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. Anyways, I'll do a little bit on the team in general. I'll try and watch the rounds mostly after Electronic dies because I am somewhat interested. And I'll probably do another review in some time to compare, right? This is somewhat my baseline. But this is a play. Admittedly, Mir never did. However, we are looking at a second round after a diffuse victory, and one of the things you might want to do in that round is figure out, just make sure that the T's are forcing, and that type of jiggle can be pretty effective at doing that. And then he actually pivots all the way back over to B, which is also something we never saw Mir doing. It felt like when I was looking at the previous VP game on Anubis, they felt a little too static in that they would kind of just like start out with 3B and then kind of just stay 3B like the whole round. And they weren't doing these kind of reactionary aggressions that you see a lot of teams do on Anubis. Showing presence in mid and then rotating back around to B is a play that I see some teams do, and it seems to make a lot of sense. But unfortunately, losing A without getting... Oh, they got one kill. Getting one kill in an A hold, you're probably just going to save here pretty much every time. Man, I really know how to pick the demos, don't I? Damn. You know, I'm thinking like, once the season starts again, I'll probably try and do some slightly more concise reviews where I actually like review the game before and then I can give you kind of some points where I'm not just kind of talking randomly. But I'm watching old demos here, right? Like this is a fairly old game, so there doesn't seem to be a great reason to put too much effort into it, into like making it super short, because there's just, it's not very topical, you know what I mean? Anyways, this time they will actually gamble off of A. You leave the MP9 A, so if the MP9 dies, it's no big deal, and then you've got your best firepower on the other side of the map, which makes perfect sense. And Electronic is going to take a risk, which is kind of what... So this kind of makes sense for two ideas. The first idea being, if he dies, you kind of bait the push, and because you've got 4 players, I think you're fairly happy if you bait like a rushed execute, but also... You know, what you really want is you want him to get the kill, and if he gets the kill, then you've got a nice 5v4, and you can even rotate off of this setup if you want, and move back into a more standardized setup, like he could pivot back to mid, and you'd have less of a gamble, right? But in this case, he actually looked like he was about to rotate off, but the hit actually comes in right afterwards, and Electronic just has really good timing. I mean, when you're looking at like players that are really good for really long periods of time, pretty much universally, it seems like almost all of them focus on taking smart engagements. And that means taking engagements where you have the upper hand and your opponents are looking the wrong direction. Oftentimes, like, this is why people call Blame F a baiter, you know, when your opponents are looking the other direction is when they're shooting at your teammates, right? And it's not like that's a bad idea. But if you over abuse that, then sometimes it can feel a little baity, right? But what Electronic was doing there was just standard like smart CS. You don't want to be like, it's very rare to find someone that plays like Donk that's like consistently good over many years, because your aim is going to fluctuate in ability. The best thing you can do is focus on taking engagements that are winning, you know, that are actually very positive and likely to be won even if your aim isn't on point. And you can, you know, you have your A, B, C games, right? You can, if your aim's on point, you can take more risky duels. But, you know, Electronic, like Nico, like Rops, these are players that do these types of plays. So I rewinded this because this is something I never saw Mir do, which is you just pivot straight off of A. I'm sure Mir did this sometimes, but this is an important play. You pivot off of A so that you can retake middle. And this is what, when I said that VP didn't play Anubis quite the way I see a lot of other teams play Anubis, what I was looking at is they weren't doing this type of play, re-aggressing in a mid or like pushing out B, these types of plays where you give up a bit of control so you can re-aggress. And leaving A to take mid control back is fairly risky because you can even both die when you go for the retake in mid. But A is like, you know, the site that you're looking to retake a lot of the time. And your opponents are going to use a lot of utility to take A, even if they, you know, if they don't know if you're there or not, right? They're still going to use a ton of utility to take A because you could be in so many different angles. They just have to assume you're there. So even if you're not there, they're going to waste a ton of utility trying to take it, and then you can just play retake on it. The aggression from Electronic works out perfectly, and you're going to notice the immediate pivot from Vitality is like, okay, well, Electronic's aggressive in mid, which means Fame is probably alone on B, and so we're just going to walk out B. And this is the benefit of having a really strong, or sorry, well, I keep saying B. I always get these sites backwards, man. There's a graph that shows like every site A is hit more often than B, except for Ancient and Anubis, because they've got them backwards. But this is like the benefit of having a really solid aimer as your A player, someone like Heavy God is like who I'm thinking of very specifically, that can actually prevent that from happening. Because otherwise you kind of have to feel like overcompensate a little bit sometimes with your opper if your A player is kind of a weaker aimer, because they're going to want to do that pivot to walking into B sometimes or walking into A sometimes. And if your A player can just out aim them, then you don't need that opper kind of giving protection to prevent against that, right? Quite as much. In any case, this is something also I just was like, why isn't VP doing this? But the problem is this is CS2 and this is Anubis, and the game I looked at earlier was, you know, even in general, even like maps other than Anubis, but especially Anubis, I feel like have really gone through a lot of kind of meta changes. So it's hard to say what exactly the meta was at the time, but this type of thing where you drop an extra smoke for your mid player, it gives him, Electronic in this case, a lot more mobility, and it's just a little more comfortable, especially because then your opponents can't know, like, if your opponents know that you throw one smoke mid and then that's it, right? It's so easy to counter that, you know what I mean? Like, you just wait out that smoke and then you can end up taking mid. But if you sometimes throw a re-smoke mid, that makes them not want to try and hard counter that like ever. You know what I mean? Because they could just get completely destroyed by having to waste an extra like 10 seconds or whatever, 20 seconds behind that smoke, which really changes the way the map is being played entirely, just by sometimes throwing a re-smoke. You don't need to do it all the time. All right, so he managed to lurk his way into a really great spot just in time. Almost absolutely wins his team the round. That was fucking clean. And the timing on that rotate is always like, you'll notice like really good players just get that perfect timing on that rotate consistently. Like they get into that corner just as the exec is coming in and then just absolutely destroy everybody. Standard mid open, holding utility a little bit. You know, it's nice if you can hold on to your utility a little bit longer, but the problem is that sometimes it can end like this, where the smoke landed and Apex was already kind of partly through it. So you try and hold your smoke for a while, but then you hold it for so long that they kind of call your bluff and they go straight through it. Oh, and this is awkward. Does this round get played? They're still playing this round. Really unfortunate situation to restart a round. I can see not wanting to restart. I can also see the excuse. I mean, I can see why they might have actually been... Oh, they did restart it. Okay. All right, so this time they actually did bring the op. No surprise. Oh, well, they lurked through the mid-smoke. Let's bring an opera over here this time. Yeah. But the problem with this is that now you have Vitality on the exact other side. And what you want to do oftentimes as a B player, you really want to hold on to your utility as long as possible. And you know, Vitality threw this smoke here, and this is like one version. So you have this as kind of one type of lurk smoke, and then you have the other lurk smoke that lands here. I guess you wouldn't really call this a lurk smoke, but I've seen it called that because it accomplishes some of the same ideas. So if Vitality's throwing that a good portion of rounds, right, then you can't just respond to it as if they're actually going to hit the site. And you want to hold on to your utility as long as possible. But unfortunately, if the timing goes wrong, holding on to your utility can eventually get you killed, which is exactly what's going to happen here. Although, did Norbert not hear him scope? Maybe this is at Blast, right? Was there a crowd at Blast? Surely you're supposed to hear him scope here. But yeah, the timing, he just gets kind of unfortunate on the timing. I mean, that's just going to happen, right? But at that point, it's a little complicated. They don't have the greatest utility. I would probably expect a save here, to be honest, unless they just get gifted like some random kill. Like Electronics trying to spam the smoke makes perfect sense, because if you get a kill off of that, you can still go for the round. But if you don't actually really want to sacrifice that op. And now this almost feels like a spot where you're going to get baited into going for it. The bomb is already ticked pretty far down, and it's like, yeah, we got 2 kills, we got to go for it. But it's like, are you really winning this without like a smoke for B main and like maybe a molly for E box? Like, are you actually going to win this almost ever? And I think the answer is no. I mean, they turn it into a 2v or 3v2. But as long as ZywOo's hitting his shots from B main, and there's no smoke for B main, I feel like that's going to be fucking tough to retake. It almost feels like one of those spots where you wish you didn't get those kills, because those kills bait you into the play that you really kind of didn't want to go for. But they do end up saving 2 guns, so at least they got that going for them. James again looking for the boost. I think they might be assuming that walk through the smoke was they boosted, and after boosting they walked through the smoke maybe, or they're just looking at the potential for that. I mean, that's one of the few plays you can really make when you have an op on Anubis to get an early kill, is to boost over that smoke. Although I mean, you can do it with a rifle too, right? But this isn't a huge buy from VP. They've just got some 5.7s, and they're doing the opposite of what they did last time, where they had that 4B stack. This time they're going for the 4A stack. The 4B stack actually did work for them, but in this case the 4A stack is not going to work for them. But actually, I mean, it basically works. I mean, there's 2 ways you can have a successful eco, right? You can win the round, or you can just get a few kills, keep the op, get an AK out of it. I feel like, you know, I would generally classify that as a successful eco. I think they saved that AK, right? Or was it just an M4? They didn't get an AK? They had 2 players save. It's like, you know, that's what I mean. All right, so this time he is Electronic, that is. Early smoke mid. No additional util from his B players, and he's just going to be back here playing super passive, and this always kind of feels like it sucks. You are in a good spot. Like, Electronic is ready. If they wanted to, they could pivot. So, like, Heavy God on OG. If this was OG, I think Heavy God would be more up, like, here. This is where, like, Heavy God loves to play these angles, and then they'd be ready to pivot into an aggressive A main retake, which is very risky. To this exact type of play, where you have like ZywOo's ready to catch the jiggle, and then they're just going to set up and go for the exec. And in this case, as long as you have a fairly quick pivot over from B, Electronic should have enough time, should be able to buy time with that molly, and then you have this pivot over from B to help support, and then you actually have a pretty strong A hold. It gets a little awkward in this spot though, where there is no pivot over from B, and then you just have two players that are kind of trapped on site, and you're just gonna go down with no trades. Well, I mean, they want to trade for each other, but this is just like nightmare fuel, right? Like you're both right next to each other with nowhere to play, and you're holding mid and A main, and that's why, I mean, that is exactly why retaking A main is something that a lot of teams like to do, because you relieve the pressure and you get an idea of what the T's were going for. You know, if they had a lot of people in there, you can get some idea of what's going on. If you're never retaking A main, then it does feel like these types of kind of like explosion style plays where you just kind of walk up, get ready, and then pop in. It just feel like they over deliver. You know what I mean? Because you're never kind of sussing that out. If you're not getting aggressive B, then you don't know if they're B or not. They in VP's mind there, Vitality could have been set up outside B or set up outside A, and both are like equally likely. Although one of the things I noticed when I was looking at the positioning is that like James doesn't seem to play A very often, and that's another thing that will help like support your A player and your mid player to some extent, is having your opper start A sometimes and just prevent those types of walk-ins. And it's not that you're going to be there, like the idea being that if the opper is there sometimes, if you have Vitality counter-stratting, they're going to be less likely to, you know, lean into those types of plays. And inside of the game itself, wow, just my house just shook. Inside of the game itself, you're going to be disincentivized from it because you're probably going to... Sometimes it is like luck, you know? Sometimes you just call the right play at the right time. Like you have James at the right spot at the right time. And you don't want to really play it reactionary, because if you play it reactionarily and it's like, oh, well, they did this, now we have to counter it. Well, they're not going to do the same thing back to back to back to back to back, right? I mean, even in this round, ZywOo is walking into mid instead of walking into A. Right, and James is watching the A play, but ZywOo's on the other side, and ZywOo's still going to be able to get lots of control. In fact, they could pivot into something else if they wanted at this point. One of the things I've noticed is that VP don't seem to love this rotate through here, right? For, I mean, good reason. There's like smokes get popped here, and then it usually, if you're retaking, you want most of the retake, I think, to be coming through here. This is like your strongest retake spot. But that does mean that, you know, they walk up and they're just like completely comfortable, not even worrying about that angle even a little bit. And they're actually going to pop through with ZywOo leading. Okay. So they've just gone completely silent, and they're just going to wait for the pop through. And Electronic is either going to dodge the flash or not. If he dodged that flash, this would be a very different round. Although, oh, he almost lines it up. But I mean, even with 3 players A, right? It's like not the easiest site to hold ever, right? That's why it's like a pretty strong site to go for retakes on, because it's just so open. It's just so easy to get blinded from all of these positions. And James was in a spot to deal with the A side of the play, but that's not what Vitality went for that time. All right, Electronic. He does get dropped an extra piece of utility here, an extra molly, it looks like. I've seen players that are willing to jump spot, even against gun rounds at this corner, to see into mid. But the problem is there's big risks behind that, right? It gets very risky to do that type of play. So Electronic is fairly mobile. Again, Vitality just seems to be making the right call at the right time. They're constantly walking into the weaker bomb site for VP. But this time around, they actually do make contact, and I think because they've been so often making contact and then ending on the same bomb site, VP's just ready and comfortable to over-rotate. And keep in mind, I was going to say keep in mind they might just want to be like very happy saving this round, because then they'll have a good buy next round. They do have enough money they could buy next round, you know, on most of their players. It wouldn't be the best. They might not have an op, but, or they would have like op no armor, but This is basically, I feel like, the round. If Electronic dies in this spot, they're kind of screwed. Well, not screwed, but it's going to be very hard. And if Electronic gets the kill, which he does, and it's an awkward spot. I mean, if you look at that from Vitality or from ZywOo's POV, right? Electronic, the key is that Electronic kind of lurked his way in there after ZywOo had already cleared it, right? So ZywOo already clears this, and getting aggressive back to move into this spot is very risky. But because this is what I talk about a lot, is that teams are so active now, you know? Because they rotate 4 players to B, and that's when you take these risks. You have 4 players B, you can take a risk. If Electronic dies, you almost bait them into going for an exec. And if he doesn't die, then he just gets into this fantastic position to be able to stop anything from going on and catch ZywOo off guard. You know, you could argue maybe ZywOo was supposed to be ready for that because they're, you know, because of the way the smokes were, it was easy for Electronic to get to the side. But I don't think they're expecting that 4-man rotate. I think it's just Vitality had gone for so many of those kind of contact explosion style plays where they had made contact earlier in the round and then they just continued, you know, they delayed and then hit the same site. VP was like, well, we're 12-10. We can afford to lose this round and then we'll be able to, we'll have a really good buy next round instead of kind of like this mid buy. And we'll just kind of over gamble on this side. And Vitality were going for the exact same thing again. Didn't work out this time. Yeah, they definitely look like they were more active, I would say. They were more active in this game than I saw in the previous game. But we'll have to see, like, as it goes on, especially because I'm not sure exactly what the meta was at the time of the original, the previous game I watched, you know, to know exactly what they were looking at, exactly how far off from the meta they were, right? But, I mean, that looked like a pretty fundamentally good game. The question is, like, is Electronic going to start calling? That's another interesting question.